I am really excited to welcome everyone to this event. My name is Nicole Morris. I'm the director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Florida Atlantic University. I'm thrilled to be celebrating this book and, of course, Jane Caputi. When I came to FAU in 2018, I had no idea what an incredible friend and mentor Jane would be. The book itself is amazing, as anyone who has been able to read it knows. For many of us, I know it's been challenging to get a copy because Oxford University Press sold out within the first couple of weeks. We do understand there will be more books coming, and there may be books available at retailers such as Powell's. So if you're looking for it, you may not be able to get it from the press at this moment, but it may be in another bookstore. But the other thing that I just want to celebrate about Jane Caputi tonight is her incredible skill as a writer. And as someone who says what she means and means what she says, I have had such incredible feedback from her over the past couple of years when I'm saying something that isn't clear or isn't what I actually mean, and she can always detect that. And this book features that incredibly powerful writing that I so admire about her. The event tonight will be structured with a short reading and some speakers speaking about the book before a Q&A. So we're hoping to offer a number of different perspectives, including, of course, Jane herself speaking about the book and reading the invocation, and then have a space to discuss it. And for the discussion, we will be using both the chat and the option for people to raise their virtual hands and be called upon to ask their questions aloud. So it's your choice whether you'd like to do one or the other. We are recording this event, so please keep that in mind, and only the speakers will be recorded. So if you choose to turn off your video and not speak, you will not be in the recording. But we're excited to preserve this event and the collection of ideas that I'm sure will emerge. Briefly, I just want to thank G. Bay and Gail Vorsis for making this event possible and helping with co-hosting this evening. The college has also been an incredible support, and also our guest speakers, who I will be introducing shortly. But finally, all I have left to say is to introduce Jane Caputi, Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Florida Atlantic University, author of Your Mutha, a Deliberately Dirty-Minded Manifesto for the Earth Mother in the Anthropocene. And Jane, take it away.
I will, thanks. Now, I just want to ask, before I get into this, I know Awiakta is here, who wrote the poem that's the inspiration for this book and appears as the epigraph. And unfortunately, she has to call in, and we don't know exactly how to unmute her. So my sister Mary suggests press pound, Awiakta, if you can hear me on the phone. But unfortunately, I'm sorry, I didn't know how to tell you how to do that. So I guess I better just begin. All right, Sam says, Awiakta, you could go to more. No, she doesn't have a screen. All right, I'll just go on rather than, and I'm so sorry. But anyway, yeah, this is the introduction that I'm calling the invocation to Call Your Mother. And it begins with the poem from Awiakta, and I can't read it as she would have, but I'll read it. It's from her great, great book. First of all, I'll tell you something about Mary Lou Awiakta. She's a Cherokee Appalachian writer and storyteller who's won multiple awards, the latest in 2020 when USA Today named her as one of 10 Women of the Century from Tennessee. Her poem, When Earth Becomes an It, that I'm going to read, appears in her great, great book, Selu, Seeking the Corn Mother's Wisdom. That inspired me and gave me the call to write this book. So I'll read the poem. When Earth Becomes an It. When the people call Earth Mother, they take with love and with love give back so that all may live. When the people call Earth It, they use her, consume her strength, then the people die. Already the sun is hot, out of season. Our mother's breast is going dry. She is taking all green into her heart and will not turn back until we call her by her name. Okay. All right, now I'm reading from my introduction, which is titled In the Name of the Mother. This book turns on the word, sorry, obscenity. You maybe all have figured that out, but I am going to be using some obscene words. This book turns on the word motherfucker. It's a word that springs from the genius of what scholar Geneva Smitherman calls, quote, black talk. And motherfucker bears a seemingly infinite range of variations and meanings. It ranges from the very worst thing you can call someone to the very best. And sometimes it doesn't mean anything at all. The word here, in my book, is that the man, as well as the human in the proposed new geological age, the Anthropocene, which means the age of man or the age of humans. And I'll just take a break from reading now in case you haven't heard of that. And Nicole, if you could move the PowerPoint one slide. The age of man is a new geological term from scientists to talk about that. Basically, they're saying that humans now, who I'm going to argue by which they mean themselves, not really the whole species, might be able to overwhelm the great forces of nature, that humans have become so dominant, et cetera. And so they're actually changing the name of the geological era from the Holocene to the Anthropocene, the age of man. That's from National Geographic. Okay, so the word here is that the man, I'm reading from my book again, as well as the human in the proposed new geological age, the Anthropocene, does not signify every one of our species. The man behind the Anthropocene is the motherfucker in the word's original and worst sense, the most vicious of oppressors and exploiters. And I'll give you a little background on that. The Black oral tradition says that the word motherfucker arose in slavery times to name the white master who routinely raped for both pleasure and profit enslaved Black women, and then enslaved his own children. So the Black oral tradition says he was not the father, he was the motherfucker. So the word then meant the worst possible exploiter or an abuser. Okay. At the same time, perennial Mother Nature Earth epitomizes the word motherfucker's best sense, the mother, the indomitable, inexhaustible, uncategorizable, and untranslatable into official terms of gender and everything else, the force source of continuous birth, growth, death, transformation, and renewal. The classification of the Anthropocene is intended to address the qualitative impact that humans are having on the global ecosystem. The present time, and I'm sure this is not news to anyone, is characterized by the seemingly boundless reach of technical mastery, but also loss of habitat and early death for many human and other than human beings, mass extinction, climate change, environmental migrations as people flee adverse ecological shifts, a new nuclear age, pandemics, topsoil blowing away forever in the wind, a plastic ocean, wars over oil as well as water, a world without birds and bees, an insect apocalypse, an air apocalypse, an all-around eco-apocalypse. Despite obvious cause for alarm, Anthropocene enthusiasts and even some critics remain confident that humanity's manifest destiny is just to conquer nature, and that these troubling matters can be resolved if we just further apply what is supposedly a uniquely human ingenuity, as well as further penetration into nature's secrets. There are already vital scholarly critiques of the Anthropocene, its arrogance and injustices, particularly the way the era is embedded in racism, colonialism, and consumer capitalism. There remains, though, a need for recognition of the way that the Anthropocene is simultaneously the expression of the inherent rapism of a misogynist and heteropatriarchal culture. Too few, even of the era's critics, reckon with the common understanding of all these ecological devastation as the rape of the earth. Nor do they face the reality of Mother Nature Earth and wonder what that original force source might have to say about all this. What calls me to this work then is twofold. One purpose is to continue the consideration of the related oppressive hatreds and violences that have led to the Anthropocene. Another is to invoke the mother. And invoke means, I go to words a lot in this, and I go to the dictionary, in this case, the Oxford English Dictionary, and I'm quoting their definition of invoke: to call on, to appeal to summon, to conjure, to utter a sacred name, close quote. This invocation or conjuration itself participates in the mother's powers of ending one way and beginning another. Calling the mother is to refuse to reproduce the Anthropocene, the whole bloody mess we're in right now, and to create something new. Accordingly, I rely on sources and directions heretical to the ruling episteme. I'm an American Studies scholar, and I consult primarily the knowledge brought to bear by cultural theorists, philosophers, scientists, artists, and thinkers from this part of the world, and specifically indigenous and African diasporic ones. I also attend closely to poetry, song, my own dreams, visual culture, speculative fictions, activist watchwords, and a resistant oral tradition carried by select pockets of folklore, popular culture, and language, including a knowledge tradition embedded in some words characterized as obscene, notably motherfucker. That word was born in 19th century slavery to name the white slave master. Here is the man behind the age of man, and motherfucking is his defining act. Let's break it down. First part of the word mother is manifold, evoking the source, that's really the meaning of mother in the Oxford English Dictionary, the source from the personal to the planetary. The second part of the word, the verb fuck, reveals heteropatriarchy's fusion of sex and violence. The word holds parallel definitions. One means to engage in sexual intercourse. Another meaning, and we all know this, of the word fuck is, quote, to harm irreparably, to finish, to victimize. Motherfucking, as I'm defining it, is forced, find my place, is forced sexualized entry into harm, domination, possession, spirit breaking, exploitation, extraction, and wasting of another for reasons of power, pleasure, plunder, and profit. Motherfucking aims to turn the source into a resource. Motherfuckers include rapists, abusers, pussy and land grabbers, slave masters, colonizers, conquerors, exploitative governmental leaders, and many of those peopling the highest ranks of militaries and corporations, notably those of fossil fuels and the industrial farming of plant and animal beings. The Anthropocene, in short, is not the age of man, it's the age of the motherfucker. But that is by no means the end of the story. Motherfucker, like all living words, moves and evolves. As time passed, the word turned, showing another face and taking on positive meanings. One contributor to the online Urban Dictionary defines motherfucker as, quote, a formidable and inexorable force. All this can lead to a recognition of Mother Nature Earth as the mother, as the fluid, adamantine, female, femme, non-binary, positive and negative force source that brings all into being and keeps all going. This mother power is strategically unnamed and unacknowledged in standard white English. Quiet as the man might try to keep it, the mother is the power capable of overwhelming him in the Anthropocene and not the other way around. As a white cisgender woman and feminist scholar, I put mother in quotes, you can see that in my title, to acknowledge my indebtedness to Black Talk and to the speakers, philosophers, artists, theologians, rappers, theorists, linguists, poets, singers, and seers who originally put forth and spin out the word's powers. These include powers of the curse and of the swear, as well as those of the prayer. These three interrelated powers provide the structure of this book, which begins with invocation, moves into the curse, answers that with the swear, and concludes with convocation. I was raised to be a good Catholic, and thus I was taught to begin any invocation by saying, in the name of the Father. This is a piety affirming a world of men over women, up over down, light over dark, thought over feeling, and mind over matter. As befits this work, appearing as it does in a series on heretical thought, I deliberately go contrary-wise to pieties, both religious and rationalist. I begin and end in the name of the mother. And that's my invocation.
Thank you so much, Jane. We will have an opportunity to return to Jane herself, as well as for questions and comments. But before we move into the Q&A portion, we're privileged to have with us several scholars, thinkers, activists who are familiar with Jane's work and who have things to share about their own responses to this book. So I am delighted to welcome Kathy Rudy, who is a professor of gender, sexuality, and feminist studies at Duke University. Her work, her latest work, focuses on animals and ethics, nature, food, politics, ecology, and ecofeminism.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Thank you for joining us to share your thoughts on this book and for making time to be here tonight.
Great. Do you have the video or no?
Yes, we can see your video. Would you prefer that I put the cover back?
Oh, I don't care. I'm seeing just your face. It doesn't matter.
Oh, we can see you. Thank you. Beautiful lights behind you.
I loved reading the book and think that it was a very profound move to connect up what we've destroyed with the possibility of hope. And untangling those, pulling them apart was, I think, Jane's strong suit. And it really, I think, harkens to a new era in the revival of ecofeminism. Jane and I talk often, and both of us are kind of at the end of our careers, and we always say to each other, what we have to give is the 1970s and 80s and all the stuff that was thrown out during that period when postmodernism and queer theory came along. And we're going back. I think what Jane is doing is going back and picking up threads that were lost and moving them forward. The baby was thrown out with the bathwater, and she is rescuing it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rudy. I really appreciate you joining us. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Brianne Faz, who is a professor of women and gender studies at Arizona State University, where she specializes in studying women's sexuality, critical embodiment studies, radical feminism, and political activism. Thank you for joining us. And I'm trying to find where I can invite you to unmute if you haven't already unmuted.
Myself.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Jane, I'm so happy to be here. I know Zoom is so awkward because we don't get to just cheer for you, but I know we're all cheering for you and this wonderful book. And I just want to say, first of all, it's such a delight. It's such a delight to get to celebrate your work. And I know it's painful in some ways when books come out in the middle of this pandemic because we don't get the opportunity to do that. And this is a really nice sort of weird, newly imagined way to do that. So I'm really pleased to be a part of it too. So one of the things I love about this book is that it is just so wonderfully radical in the way that that word is supposed to mean, which is digging down into the root of a thing and trying to understand it as best we can, and then providing a very really intense, scathing critique of what we find, and then making like a sort of blueprint for building a different world. So I think what I love about this book is it brings together things that I care about all into one. So it has the best elements of radical feminism. It's definitely a manifesto, which is wonderful, and I think necessary for us all right now. We need manifestos that are urgent and of the moment and meant for inciting a passionate readership as well, and sort of piercing through the sort of rarefied academic language and going right to the heart. And there's so many, you can open up any page of this book and just start reading it there, and it feels like a sort of medicine, where we get to kind of hear from all these amazing different voices, and then of course your wonderful voice. And I love how it has a kind of way of offer. I said this when I was sort of blurbing the book too, that it really is a kind of world building book of we're at these various crossroads. And I think the pandemic is a time where we all feel that more than ever, where it's sort of like, we better get this together and we're at this crossroads between, you know, a world that like is full of new possibilities or one that is going to go up in flames. And I feel like there's never been a more like timely book to read than this for right now in this moment at this crossroads, and especially for the stakes being so high for women, people of color, you know, the global South, all of the people who are most vulnerable. So thank you for writing this. And I love also, I tell Jane this all the time, but I love how her work is not so specific and niche that it only speaks to 5 people, that instead she's like incredibly just unfailingly ambitious in the way that she writes and how she reaches out to these huge audiences. And I feel like we can give this book like to our moms and our friends and a whole bunch of people who would never otherwise enter a book that's, you know, like citing work and like looking and integrating all these different literatures. But Jane is, you know, she's refusing the worst parts of academia and embracing the best. So I love everything about this book. And Jane, I love you, and I'm so proud to celebrate it with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
both, Brianne and Kathy. I love both of you too, and I'm so appreciative that you came here for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Claus. Anna Louise Keating also wanted to be here tonight, but was unable to, and asked me to read a brief statement. Her work primarily focuses on transformation studies, US women of color theories, Gloria Anzaldúa, and pedagogy. And she writes that Call Your Mutha is beautifully ambitious. Jane Caputi draws from and builds on a wide range of scholarship and produces an original contribution to the literature. Her bold claims are refreshing and break new ground. This book is a must-read for scholars of gender studies, environmental studies, Native American studies, religious studies, and African American studies. We're living through a time of radical transformation, and Jane's book can offer useful insights along the way. Congratulations, Jane, on your important contribution to transformation.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Anna Louise.
And our final speaker, before I turn the mic back over to Jane to provide any additional remarks before our Q&A, is Ruddy Turnstone. Ruddy is an FAU alum, a student of Jane's, and an activist focusing on environmental and social justice issues. Ruddy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And hi, Jane, it's so good to see you again.
Likewise.
Good evening, everyone, and good day and good afternoon for our international audience in different time zones. It is such an honor to help celebrate the launch of Dr. Jane Caputi's new book, Call Your Mutha. My name is Ruddy Turnstone, but she knew me as Rachel Kieski. And although it's been almost a decade since I graduated from FAU with my bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies, there's only one single professor who shines at the forefront of my memory, and that's Jane. Although I always struggled with the mountains of books we were assigned to read during Green Consciousness, I felt like I had finally found a place where I was understood. There was a general understanding I had about the world from traveling and doing various kinds of activism, and that was really reinforced and expanded through the lens that we were provided in Jane's class. Green Consciousness helped show me my place in this world. It gave me hope in our own strength and helped me and so many others see how gender, race, and environmental issues intersected. And it's a little hard to explain, but Jane knew my heart. She fueled my passion for fighting for our Mother Nature Earth, and she always gave me grace when I couldn't pull all the way through. I always felt like she believed in me, and I know that I'm not alone in these feelings. What her and Dr. Beoku Betts taught me stayed with me and prepared me for the obstacles yet to come. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work just because I feel like they both of them influenced me in terms of the way I turned out. And it's because of these powerful women that I went on to live my dreams fast and furiously. Shortly after I graduated FAU, I helped organize and participate in the first tree sit in Florida, where we tried to save the largest unprotected intact forest on the eastern seaboard of South Florida by living in the trees for weeks. And although we were ultimately unsuccessful in that project, it didn't stop me. I went on to become a direct action climb trainer, teaching people of all races and genders how to climb for training for environmental as well as social justice issues. I went on to be a part of the first human drawbridge where we blockaded Shell's ship from transporting equipment vital to deep drilling in the Arctic, which ultimately was ceased shortly after. Since then, I have taken my direct action skills and utilized them to fight for immigrant justice, Black liberation, including local fights against our unwelcome neighboring geo group. I built relationships with people in our local tribal nations, such as Independent Traditional Seminole Nation, the Miccosukee and Seminole Tribe, to fight energy infrastructure projects affecting them and to fight modern day colonialism. And now, due to COVID-19, I've moved into prison and detention center abolition through a hotline I help run, connecting to locally incarcerated folks, getting information out about the abhorrent conditions inside that otherwise would go unnoticed. I've been able to do this because of the foundation of knowledge I was given by my women's studies professors. And I now know that one of my callings in this world is to help continue the work in the world of drawing the parallels between environmental, carceral, gender, and race issues, because as Jane has always shown us, they are deeply interwoven and connected. Although throughout my life, I always wondered in class, how does this apply to my practical life skills? I never needed to doubt that in Jane's class. I knew that the words, essays, and texts she shared with us were vital in growing deep empathy and understanding of the real Mother Nature Earth, not the one that capitalism and patriarchy try to pitch to us. I knew that this lens was vital to countless students and would sow seeds of resistance and powerful systemic transformation for years to come. I never doubted the value of her teachings and work, only knew there needed to be more classes like hers in the world. And finally, as Jane mentions in her book, there is no and has never been a separation between gender and Mother Nature Earth. The messy, dirty, unclear way Mother Nature Earth ebbs and flows has never fit into the box of the patriarchal colonizer. It is these boxes which lead to violent nation states, which ostracize those who don't conform. These boxes which lead to missing and murdered Indigenous women, men, and Two-Spirit people along highways where man camps exist as a byproduct of tar sands extraction. The rape of Mother Nature Earth is ever present among us, and the patriarchal consumer capitalist regime has always fought to hide it. But thanks to Jane and her new book, the fight to uncover and expose the motherfuckers of this world continues, will gain traction and breed a new generation of revolutionaries willing to fight for that which gives them and all beings on this earth life. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Nicole, for having me.
Thank you so much.
A plus.
Can't imagine a better testimonial for a professor. And I thought of inviting Ruddy because the last time I saw Ruddy and Jane at the same time once last year, I think. And Jane said, oh, the last time I saw you, you were sitting in a tree. And I had to find out the story there.
Really?
So after all of these incredible testimonials and responses, I want to put you back on the spot, Jane. If there's anything else you would like to share before we move to Q&A, I do have the PowerPoint ready if you'd like to speak about any of the art from the book, and really excited to follow your lead.
You know, I just want to hear questions from the audience. I know that not all of you had a chance to read the book, but you've heard some about it, and you know, certainly there's plenty to talk about. But before, can I just make some thank yous first? First of all, thank everybody here. Thank you, Kathy, Brianne, Ruddy, Nicole, so much for putting this together. And G, Young Bai, too, for helping and organizing this event. And I want to really shout out love to my family. I know some of my family are here, my friends, and especially, I think you all get the idea that like FAU has been a really wonderful place for a lot of us. And that, so I want to give a little shout out to all my FAU people from whom I have really received unremitting support. Carol Prusa, I think might be here. Carol Prusa is a professor of painting, and she let me include and write about her magnificent painting, Nebula, which maybe we could show on the PowerPoint. in this book. And, you know, teaching me, the artwork was teaching me so. And everybody affiliated with the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies helped me so much. And especially, you know, my very close colleagues, Josephine Bioku-Betts, Sika Dagbovi-Mullins, Barclay Barrios, and our center's tremendous advisory council, and the astute and awesome graduate students who read parts of the book while I was working on it and gave me feedback. So thank you, Jeanette Coleman, Sophia Honickman, and Danny Arias. And of course, thank you to Dean Michael Horswell, and before him, Heather Coltman. And I have to say, to Roka, our fabulous research committee, I had a lot of support, and that's why I'm here and the book is here. So thank you all. And now I guess we should just have questions from all of you. If you want me to talk about anything else in the book, what exactly I mean by Call Your Mother, you know, any of the chapters, you know, anything.
And I will ask folks, please raise your virtual hand or post in the chat if you'd like to ask a question, just to moderate the event, since we have 80 people on the Zoom call. Want to make sure everyone can be heard. While you're formulating your questions, I'm just going to take a moment and do a quick screen share showing the artwork that Jane was referring to. Still learning how to use Zoom, forgive me.
Okay, thank you for managing it. Yes, there's Carol Prusa's wonderful work.
And we'll enjoy it full screen.
Yeah.
And thanks again to Gail Borsis and G. Bay for helping to moderate. I am looking to see if we have any hands raised. If you don't know how to do that, go to participants, and you can raise your hand, or you can raise your hand through the more option. We do have one question from earlier from Doug McEtchin, who's faculty member at FAU. And Doug asks, how can we reject the exploitative aspects of the Anthropocene without also rejecting critical thinking / reason, concerned about conspiracy theories, irrational fake news, and gaslighting by irrational motherfuckers in power? Without reasonable and rational counters, how are we to disarm patriarchy?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. I don't disavow reason. I disavow that kind of hyper rationalization that like splits consciousness, so that we have to make these, you know, we pretend to this kind of objectivity that you know, that leads to domination. You know, you are in the dominant position studying or unlocking the secrets of whatever it is you're studying. You know, it's a rapist model. So we really do need to, we need to bring back so much of what has been discredited, what Toni Morrison calls discredited knowledge, that there are, you know, we really do need to understand that there are other ways of knowing, and that these are earth-based ways of knowing that, you know, that bring back together mind and body, heart, you know, like when Reddy said something about her heart, right? Like we know things through our heart as well as through our mind, and we have to bring this back together. So I do not, and I agree, I'm as worried about conspiracy theories, especially nowadays, as you or any of us are. So yeah, we have to have this really blending, balancing of reason and visionary, intuitive knowledge, that we recognize that we are not, you know, the sole source of the knowledge either. That like knowledge and language do come from the land, that we learn from other than human beings. We have to get out of this kind of egocentric model of, you know, the great thinker, who is usually obviously a white man, but that we're all supposed to aspire to, and develop and listen to other ways of knowing. So, but I'd love to have more talk about that, Doug, you know, especially as we teach, you know, and especially in the era as the conspiracy theories tend to overtake us.
Do we have a question from Skeets Friedkin?
Okay.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Skeet.
Oh, I'm so impressed. Thank you for starting to educate me.
Of course. And Skeets is, of course, the co-director. Is that the title of our co-chair of our advisory council?
Yeah. What I want to know firstly is, what was the tick in your life that made you follow this path?
Oh, well, I think growing up, if any of you know Gretchen Rubin's The Four Habits, I'm a rebel. And I just, I really resisted the patriarchal authority of the church, the Catholic Church that I grew up in. I perceived sexism from an early age, and I just knew it was wrong. And I really wanted something else. And I think, we have these, like, when we're young, I mean, it really is true. We're a little more raw, and we have these elemental connections to the land and to animals and to other beings. And I can remember dreams I had when I was 4 years old, and I just never really wanted to lose that, right? So something in me like got this at an early age. And I even had dreams telling me, and I recite some of them in the book, at a very early age, that the earth was crying out and that we had to do something about it. So yeah, there was just, born rebel, I guess.
Well, as a novice in all of this, quite honestly, I want to thank you and the other members of the staff, that your teachings to these young people who have received such a wonderful fortune of intelligence and interest and being able to describe things so differently than the normal conversations are ever said. I can't really get over hearing the graduate students speak, and I'm forever impressed. I had no concept of this growing up, quite honestly. I was a young woman and I got married and I serviced my community as best I could, but I never had any realm of this kind of information, and it's priceless.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
priceless.
Thank you, Skeets.
It's priceless in today's world and the world to come, if there is one.
Yep.
If we don't screw it up. Thank you, Judy.
On that note, let me turn it over to one of our graduate students who had a question. As Skeets was saying, we are privileged to have incredible grad students here at FAU. Sophia Honigman, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, Dr. Caputi. I guess it's more, you kind of touched on it just now, but I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to read the manuscript before and make some comments and have my thoughts kind of marinate over time. But one of the things that I really appreciated, especially as a young scholar in academia, was how you implement dreams and what you were just saying, these alternative forms of knowledge that have been subverted by patriarchy, capitalism, etc., and your inclusion of them as legitimate forms of knowledge, right? And it's something that I try to constantly do personally as in this process of like decolonizing myself, right? Like what I consider a form of legitimate knowledge. And that's something that I found like really, really powerful in your book. And I was just hoping that you can share a little bit more about that and how your inclusion of all of this so seamlessly together.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that people have theorized. What we're calling discredited knowledge is actually philosophy, right? In another culture, right? Or science, right? Yeah. That has been meticulously studied and honed over the years. Like, for example, in many indigenous cultures, there's a book by an anthropologist, Hugh Brody, I think is his name, called Map of Dreams, that like people basically had developed a science that certain people were gifted enough to dream to know where the animals were or which plants were edible. And like, this is something that isn't just, we tend to think, oh, that's sort of instinct or something just intuitive, right? This is actually science and practice and like learned and observed and studied and honed so that you develop this kind of skill. It's a kind of technology that you develop. So I want to like stress that it's not just somehow we have this, you know, we have to break out of that kind of, oh, here's rationality over here and here's intuition over here. They've been falsely divided, right? And what we call intuition is actually science sometimes. But so, yeah, so I think it was, you know, I saw a chat there from Teresa Cordova out there, who was my colleague at the University of New Mexico. And, you know, when I first got my first job at the University of New Mexico, I was like living, I heard the land and like obviously was greatly taught by like indigenous people in New Mexico I encountered, right? You know, but you also like you have to realize that you're being taught all the time, right? That you just have to be open to learning it. And then of course you have to activate it and you have to go study and you have to research and you have to do all that too. But I think we also just have to be like, okay, I'm going to do this. I am going to pay attention to this kind of knowledge and I am going to use my critical thinking to recognize the limitations of Western knowledge, right? And sort of depart from like, think of like the paradigm we're in where all we consult is European knowledge. You know, most of the books about the Anthropocene consult the same 5 European men or something like that. And it's like, okay, enough. I'm sure they have something to say, but that's not all there is to it. And let's face it, let's be real. Western ways of thinking have brought us to this time of ecocide. Right. So maybe we need to look elsewhere for knowledge.
Oh, what a relief to hear that.
Sarah Wright, did you want to ask a question?
Oh, did I?
I saw you were unmuted and just wanted to check in if you wanted to.
No, I was just commenting on what Jane said.
Okay, thanks.
So right.
Absolutely.
Such a relief to hear that.
Jane, yeah, I'm trying, see.
Thank you. Jane, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how this book fits into the trajectory of your work. This is something that both Teresa Cordova and Carol Prusa have asked about. This is your 4th book, and I did not mention that in my introduction of you, what your other books have addressed, but what would be the trajectory across your work?
I've always looked at violence, right? My first book was on serial sex killers as the way they were achieving heroic status. And my last part of that book really went to like, why the most famous serial sex killer is Jack the Ripper, and then like look at like a classic movie like Dr. Strangelove, where it's General Jack D. Ripper who destroys the world in nuclear holocaust. And there really is, whether in the F word itself or in, you know, there is a deep, deep connection between that kind of violence that is very much rooted in a gender-based sexual violence, as well as, you know, all the other hierarchies. So I think I began with looking at like that kind of sexualized and gender-based violence leading to, you know, this kind of extremity of what we call femicide, you know, these serial sex killers killing women, and of course also two-spirit people and boys and young men. But it's also, you know, then when I moved to New Mexico, this is where they invented the atomic bomb, right? And you're just, you know, you're listening to the land, you're learning about what's going on, and I started to realize, and also Mary Daly always taught me something, somebody said, that I don't just bring in despair and the violence, but you have to flip it, just like the MF word flips. There's always a flip side. And, you know, when you flip it, you try and make it come out another way. And, you know, it really is a stratagem, conceptually as well as through activism. So I'd always try and find like some other kind of, you know, story to tell about it. And certainly that came to fruition in New Mexico when I listened to indigenous philosophy about the bomb as really signifying a return in some ways of feminine power, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but anyway, so I started looking at like real issues of the earth, real issues of like gender-based mythology and the earth in New Mexico. And then I guess, I'm not exactly sure, but those themes have preoccupied me throughout. And so all of them come together as well in Call Your Mother. And I go further, I think, than, or deeper, to use not such a linear, but deeper than I ever have with them as well, where I look at the terrible violence, but I also look at, this is not the only story. This is the story that is the only one they want us to hear, but there's another story. And like ultimately what Call Your Mother is saying, and again, I was inspired by that poem from Awi Akta, is that we see all this destruction happening around us. But are we really so sure that man is so powerful and he's doing all this damage? Or is his ability even to do this damage because the Earth Mother has basically turned away? Her breast has gone dry. She's taken all green back into her heart. So in some ways, what we're seeing is not so much the efficacy of man, but the departure of the life force. And that's what I mean, that we have to call back that force. It is a human obligation to behave in that kind of practical, activist, and ritual way, to constantly feed the source. The source is not only who feeds us, but we have to return energy to the source. All ecologists say that, from Wangari Maathai to Linda Hogan to others, some of the deepest thinkers. We have to replenish the source. That's Wangari Maathai's book. So that's what we need to learn how to do. And do it.
I want to just offer, you said further and then you replaced it with deeper, and I'm going to offer spiralic, or to continue the spiral. And I share that because you have taught me about spiralic thinking in our walks on the beach as we observe shells. So I felt like I had to mention that. Eileen Prusher, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I'm using the raise hand and lower hand for the first time ever, because I'm usually teaching on this. So like, oh, that's how that works. Jane, first of all, congratulations. Just like very, very exciting to be here and marking this momentous book launch with you. I have to say, as someone who's, I teach journalism at FAU, so I'm a little bit of a word nerd, and I just loved the introduction of the book. And, unlike some book launches you go to, I know I want now to read it. And I'm, as someone who's personally really interested in etymology, I was so curious about that link. I mean, I had never given much thought to the roots of the word motherfucker, and that it was related to rape culture. And I was curious to ask you, a little bit about the sort of research journey to getting to the roots of that word, and just the very concept of words really having memory in their DNA. And it's just such a fascinating topic in and of itself. So I wondered, was that a starting point for the book, or you were already on the way to researching this book and then realized, oh, wow, that is the concept that ties it together, and that's my title? Because I always love to hear the story of how a book is born.
Yeah. No, it started with the word, and I learned about going into the deep memory of words, as well as their evolution, as well as the fact that words are alive, that we're not just using words to speak with them, but words are actually alive. Words are speaking with us. And language, Simon Ortiz says, the Yakima poet, that, as well as Padraig, whose last name I forget, the Irish poet, says language comes from the land. The land is actually giving us the words all the time. So it started with the word. I just knew that, I don't know, Kelly, I forgot, I have to look in my book. Kelly's given me a possible last name for the poet. But it started with the word. I just knew the word had something about it, right? But then, of course, you research it. And Geneva Smitherman, who I mentioned, is like the premier scholar of Black English, right? And she wrote a book with Sami Alim called Articulate While Black. And, it was partially on how Obama was, Obama's discourse. But there they really lay out the oral history of the word motherfucker as coming from the slavery plantation and what it meant. And and then the more I researched, I started looking, of course, at the other meaning. Again, Geneva Smitherman in her book, Black Talk, has a whole chapter on the word. So I learned a great deal from that. But, then I started researching more in popular culture, and I'm not the first one. I mean, well, there's so much more. There's funk theorist Lamonda Horton Stallings, who writes about the word mother in the power, the empowering verbal discourse of Black women defining themselves. James Brown had an album in the 70s that I didn't know about until I started researching, called Mutha's Nature, M-U-T-H-A. So this is what I mean. I am not really telling this story. It's not something I'm making up. I'm putting together a synthesis. This story is being told about the call to the mother to return. It's all through the culture. It's in art. It's even in movies like Frozen or Moana, which are terrible in some ways, right? They're very colonial, especially Moana, very colonialist. But it's still this idea that the planet is dying because the life force has withdrawn. So anyway, it started with the word, and then from there, you know, and it all just sort of accretes as you go. You find the path as you go.
Thank you. Fascinating.
As a follow-up to that question, actually, Jasly Pizzuti asked about the story of the title, and Kelly Shannon asked about, you know, the use of profanity, and Kelly mentioned Egyptian feminist Mona El-Tahawi, pardon if I got that name incorrect, names profanity as one of the 7 necessary sins that feminists must commit in order to overthrow the patriarchy.
Right.
And so I'm curious, yeah, if you would speak more about the use of profanity and also the way the title of the book shifted.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kelly. I have not read that book yet. I mean, I almost thought I should really read this and use it in feminist theory, but I didn't know she did that. I know it's about the 7 deadly sins. So that's great. I agree. I think, like, what is obscene, and it's the C word there too, the C-U-N-T word. Oh, that's great, Eileen. Seeing quote, Mona, Eileen knows Mona. But anyway, you know, obscene words can also, if we really look at like what becomes obscene in a culture, it reveals a great deal about what's sacred in the culture and what is taboo, what is marginalized, what is repudiated, right? We learn about body and misogyny, body loathing and misogyny. Why do we call people like an ass or, you know, a prick or a cunt, right? I mean, like, what about this kind of sex negativity and hatred in words? We really do need to look at words. And often, I think what cannot be assimilated in the culture, or what nobody is, you know, like the people who first used the word motherfucker to name the master, they were putting down a theory. They were theorizing, right? And they were putting down a theory that we could later, of course, uncover. So I do think there's like all this kind of theoretical work going on with words. And I was first going to call the book Motherfuck, and I actually got my proposal accepted. But then the editor, Angela Chinopko, and Ruth O'Brien, the series editor, called me up and said, no, we can't go with that title for publication. So we need another title. And they were suggesting some titles. And like, I guess just in that conversation, I came up with Call Your Mother. And they both said immediately, that's it. But it was the energy that the 3 of us were sharing. And that's why seminars and dialogue and what we do in the university is so important, right? Or the kind of conversation we're having now, because we're all putting our energies together. We're sort of cooking together, and it creates a sort of pathway for the ideas to flow, I think.
Vita Smith, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I had to unmute my system.
Hi, Vida.
Hi, Dr. J. I really appreciate you, and I love you so much, you know that. And it was awesome working with you, but today you have made an awesome impression here. And I just want to know, I just want to say that that word, the MF word, has been an abomination in my house.
Has what?
It has been an abomination in my house.
Okay, yeah.
But the way you explained everything today, I'm just going to embrace it and use it as I need to, because I have to. But I have a question. This is a very, it's very timely, and we all know that this is very timely in this age. And I just want to know when we are going to intrude, you know, or invade the legal system. We know our legal system is failed, and everybody knows that. And when are we going to intrude, you know, our legal system and the professionals who worship this kind of words, this kind of people, the motherfuckers?
Yeah.
Are you planning to have some kind of, you know, do you have any plans in the future to work with these people, you know? Because we all know that, especially in Palm Beach County, they worship these motherfuckers. I couldn't say it, but now I can say it loud. Do you
Remember
have
when Congresswoman Tlaib,
yes.
you know, just said right out?
Do you have any plans of working with them? Because, you know, I know you're working from the root, you know, teaching students and people around you and, you know, other people. But I think there's a loophole here that we have to tackle. Do you have any plans?
No, but I'm always open to getting the message out wherever I can. You know, teaching is very consuming, right? I mean, in a very good way. I mean, it does take up all my time. But I always want to get the message out further. And if you can help me think of any ways, or if we could work together on something, I think that would be a great idea.
Sure.
Right?
We'll do that.
Reach out to
Sure.
other communities.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree, Vida. Thank you.
That would be great.
Okay, we've talked about it for a long time. We better start doing it, right? Yes.
So many possibilities for the future coming out of this event already. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. We have a couple of questions in the chat that are related to your use of language, Jane, and your work with Mary Daly. And there's some questions about how your collaboration with her on the Wikidary, sorry, I got that name wrong, on the, I always want to say Wicked Dictionary. I'm going to turn it over to you and stop mispronouncing this. On the way that language has functioned through your work.
Yeah. You know, for Mary, and I do think this is in like Irish indigenous knowledge, you know, language is alive. Mary was a bard, right? In like that way. And a bard is somebody who can conjure energy with words. And she looked very deeply into words. And, you know, when we were working together, her cat, Wildcat, would sit on the dictionary. It was like, okay, the word work is beginning. And, you know, Mary was, you know, she was my teacher when I was an undergraduate at Boston College. And talk about somebody who opened up the world to you. She did that indeed. You know, obviously, Mary, we all make errors, and out of errors can come contributions, can come, you know, animosities, can come errors. You know, Mary was not right about everything, but who is, right? And I still absolutely honor everything that she taught me. And she taught me how to think. And what can you say to somebody who taught you how to think except that? Thank you.
There are also a couple of questions that relate to COVID-19. So Josephine Baker-Betts asked, how can we draw on your work and your insights in this current reality? And then also Jeff Leland wrote that it is, I'll just read this comment. Kia ora Jane, much of the world looks upon the US with dismay and alarm, so it is heartening to see you and your colleagues leading the pushback. It's just a pity we can't get you to visit New Zealand. Our borders are largely closed, but you could be allowed entry as an essential service. And offered to introduce you to Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister. So on this note of the kind of contemporary moment, do you see ways that your book, which obviously was written and published or, you know, went into press before the pandemic, can directly help us respond to this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the law of the mother is the law of respect, right? The reason the mother is turning away is because she has been, or they have been, I use various pronouns, disrespected. And disrespected is to violate boundaries. Vine Deloria gives just an amazing, Vine Deloria, the Lakota scholar, gives just the most essential definition of respect that I quote in the book. But it's basically, you know, you have to respect all people's great individual differences. That's number one. And number two, you can never intrude thoughtlessly upon another, right? I mean, ecological thinking is basic etiquette in some ways. You never, ever violate another's boundaries. You always ask permission. You wait to be invited, you know, all of that. And that's what we don't do. And what the pandemic, you know, most people who are saying the cause of the pandemic is massive deforestation, and people, for reasons of either hunting or looking for pharmaceuticals or clearing land to grow feed for factory farmed animals, you know, all sorts of reasons people are intruding into wild spaces. And this is, you know, without proper precautions or respect or making, you know, what indigenous people would say, you have to have a treaty with the people who, and the people, they mean what we mean by animals and plants. You have to have a treaty with the people who live there. You have to have an agreement that you can go in there. You have to ask permission. And our culture is not doing that. And, you know, for these reasons, you know, you go into these areas and the virus like says, oh, great, here's a new host I can hop into, right? So the more we like cut down forests and intrude into wild areas thoughtlessly and without respect, the more this will happen. So the key to really undoing this is to respect and to not take this idea that, you know, to boldly go where no man has gone before. That's colonialism, that's rape, right? That is complete violation of boundaries. And there are consequences to that. It's not like the Old Testament God punishing you or something like that. It's just nature has a feedback system. Nature will respond, nature will adjust, a virus will take the opportunity to like further itself, right? And we think we're the dominant species on the planet. That's why the Anthropocene is so ridiculous. Like in the book, I quote the physicist, you know, Michael, you know who I mean, the famous physicist. But anyway, he says, we think we're in charge, haha. Fecal bacteria are in charge. And right now we could say, yeah, COVID-19 is in charge, right? We are not in charge. It's this incredibly arrogant big baby mentality that says that man now overwhelms nature. Quite the contrary.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Jane, for your insights and your wisdom. We have a little bit more time if anyone is still percolating a question. I was wondering, Jane, if there are any particular artworks that you would like to discuss in a little more detail, or some of the advertisements, the book.
Yeah, we could. Well, if Carol Crusoe is here, Carol, can you tell us something about Nebula? And we can look at some of the other artwork as well.
Right. Well, thank you. And also thank you, Jim, for showing my image. That was so generous of you. It was really an honor to have my work pictured in your book already, because I've read all your books. And so I recommend everybody read all the books leading to this one. And I just got my copy, so I haven't read the full thing, but I read the very end, which was just really profoundly beautiful to me. So sometimes I like to read the end of the book and then go to the beginning. So I'm glad you read the beginning. So let me talk about Nebula. Well, in your book, when you discuss it, you talk about it being the cosmic dust of the universe. And I very much like what you wrote. And you're the writer, I am not. So I appreciate when people can put things into a beautiful way of saying them that make them more profound than I maybe even understood when I made the piece. Because like you were just mentioning, channeling something. I think I channel, right, in some way. So Nebula is the location where stars are born and is a birthing ring, or the idea of everything comes from the dust of stars and everything goes back to the dust of stars. So that means we're all interconnected. We're all one thing. We're all in this together.
Yep, and I looked at your painting, which is not the one behind you, but I looked at your painting and I saw what Erykah Badu describes as the wombiverse, you know, like as in the womb, wombiverse, but the womb not as a bounded organ in the body of a woman, but as, you know, this cosmic creative force. Mm-hmm. And well, you'd have to read it to see what Erykah Badu and then Marlo David, the scholar, talking about her makes of this, but certainly, yes. And just as you put it, it really reminds us that the separation between us, you know, it's all in the word identity. Our identity is our own unique personal identity, but identity at the same time means sameness, right? That we are both one completely unique individual, but we are also all the same at the same time. And that is true. And we have to develop the kind of psychological, spiritual, intellectual capacities so that we can really feel that and know that. And if we did, we would not be able to pollute, for example. I mean, I'm sort of saying what's obvious, but by polluting you, I'm polluting myself, you know? So, and that's in the book, what I call the state of concupiscence. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we do find a lot of different words because we need new words to name other realities that have been masked or erased or made taboo. So that's why we sometimes need these taboo words.
Roger Messenger, did you have a question?
Question, comment, whatever. Quite a few of the folks on this call know that I'm Jane's partner, and we've been together for 19 years now. They maybe don't know that I'm also an engineer, kind of a dyed-in-the-wool engineer, but I think now, I oftentimes introduce Jane as the woman through whom I live vicariously, and I think everyone on the call now understands why that is. And I mean, my primary interest is climate change, and it's very clear to me that science does not have all the answers, and we all have to team up together. Science has a lot of good ideas, but without getting the social element and the sociological concepts that Jane is bringing out in this book, maybe together we can solve a few of these problems. Maybe hopefully we'll start on the 3rd of November or sooner.
Yeah. Mm. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I want to share briefly some of the art from the book, if that works for you.
That'd be nice.
And Jane, if you'd like to comment at all, we'll just go through it a little, slowly, not rapidly flying through the slides. But just let me know what you'd like to speak to, and we'll do that for a few minutes, and then we will be able to wrap this up and say good night and till the next revolution, next step on the revolution.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a Trans Day of Resilience poster by Amir Khadar, and I was just so taken with this image, as there's so many ways. At a certain point I bring in like who Mother Nature Earth is, who the mother is who they appear to you to be. There's a wide range of understandings of the mother, including for me. I see the mother in so many different presences, and I definitely see the mother in this presence. And if you read, and like any Goddex, G-O-D-D-E-X-X, you are scorned and become the fire anyway. And I just saw this extraordinary being as evoking that sort of wombiverse. I see the same kind of star field pattern in her as I see in Carol Pruse's Nebula, which is also very similar to what Zora Neale Hurston, who I'm writing about, is talking about as infinity. So the colors of pink and purple are of the African deity Oya, who is the bringer of change, storm, fire, who is evoked by Octavia Butler and many other Afrofuturist writers. So I do a lot with Afrofuturism, particularly in the last chapter. And we'll talk about some of the art in that regard. But okay, so we'll look at more of the art. Oh, this is just God. My first chapter is called The Gods We Worship, and how basically Anthropocene man is basically, I mean, he names himself. There's a book about the Anthropocene called The God Species. in which humans have become gods. And by not, they don't mean humans, they mean themselves. But this is like God as imagined in the Christian tradition as this father, male, above it all, like basically measuring and controlling the earth. And in the center of the earth is Hyli, or chaos. And guess what? That's us. That's everyone who's named other, femme, savage, you know, all the kind of like woman. That's who God is controlling. And then this is a frontispiece from a conquistador manual where the conqueror is really presenting himself as God, doing the exact same thing to the earth. And that's that kind of, you know, we have to look at the spiritual. The Anthropocene, I say, is not just a geological phenomenon, it's a philosophical and theological phenomenon. It's really man's attempt to make himself God. And so that's one of the themes in the book. Okay. This, I think, is a riot. Is this hysterical? From 1930, W. Gransel Fitz, Big Baby. And, you know, this is the ultimate, like, motherfucker fantasy. You know, he never grows up and he completely dominates his mother, right? And I wanted to put an image in there. You know how so often there's that Trump baby with the diaper? Like they float that big balloon. It's basically the same kind of thing. Unfortunately, they can do a lot of damage. But this is the fantasy of omnipotence, that the baby actually is controlling the mother. And this is the great artist, I mean, I love her activist art, Flaviana Rodriguez. And this was the poster for the People's Climate March in 2014 that I actually, at the Climate March, I had this poster, but it's also her work of art that, and that is not, that the Earth Mother is invoked, defend our mother, and that's like a radical mother activist who's pictured there. Okay. And this is, I don't know if you know Berta Cáceres, the great but assassinated activist from Honduras, who fought for the Lenca indigenous people, her people, and who drew upon the Lenca cosmovision vision of respect for Mother Earth. And this is, she was assassinated, and a year after her death, COPIN, her organization, drew her as actually the land of Honduras. You can see that there. So I have a lot about her in the book and her philosophy. And she invokes Mother Earth, and COPIN is deliberately anti-heteropatriarchal, pro-LGBTQ rights, pro-women's rights, and pro-indigenous rights, and activist against, you know, the international miner, you know, it's the mining companies that are going to destroy this river. And they killed her. And, you know, she talks about Mother Earth, and she talks about the spirits of the river, all of which would be dismissed by Western rationalism. But, you know, we have to get out of that kind of thinking. This is what I was talking about, Doug. We can't see this as just a metaphor. We have to take people at their word. This is not a metaphor. This is real. And we have to expand our intelligence and our knowledge and our epistemologies beyond that sort of narrow Eurocentric model that would dismiss this as mere metaphor or folklore or nonsense. Okay, we can go on.
Well, actually, I'm going to pause the share, and I'm going to invite Jeanette Coleman to ask a question. And then I think we should wrap up. I know that I'm keeping you late into the evening, Jane.
For me, yeah.
Jeanette Coleman, did you have a question you wanted to, or a comment you wanted to share?
The only thing I wanted to say is, sitting here and engaging in this interaction is like being in the class with Dr. Caputi. I'm taking notes. And I'm looking for a class that you're offering in the spring for my PhD, so I can jump in there and get some more of Jane. I need more Jane.
I hope so, because I learn a lot from you.
I've really enjoyed, I think I've taken 2 classes with you, and I'm an adjunct instructor right now. I'm a PhD candidate right now, and my position, like my status changes back and forth, but I'm glad we're friends, and I'm really glad that I was able to engage with everyone in with you and see your face, because if it wasn't for the pandemic, we would be meeting somewhere at some new restaurant or something.
We would.
We would be all walking on the beach, right?
Yes.
But this is absolutely awesome, and I'm really glad that I was able to join everybody. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Because I saw a lot of her work as she was writing, and I asked questions and whatever. But I just got the book yesterday, and I had to really work with UPS because they delivered it to the people across the street from me. And the people across the street from me did not have the wherewithal to say, "Oh, it's over there." So I put UPS through the ringer. I got my book yesterday, and I did read the first thing, but I'm going to continue to read, and I'll just love it, I'm sure.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thank you.
So for everyone on this call, if you do not have the book, again, it may be available at Powell's or other booksellers. It will soon hopefully be available from Oxford once again. For students on the call, Jane is teaching a course on related topics for graduate students in the spring, so keep an eye out for that. And I'm going to return us to, oops, that was supposed to be the cover of your book, but.
Thanks for handling the PowerPoint.
I'm going to return us to the cover and just thank you again for sharing this work with us and for taking this time this evening to talk with us about it. And thank you so much to Kathy Rudy, to Brianne Faz, to Ruddy Turnstone for joining us. I see a question in the chat. We will be putting the recording of this conversation and event up on the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Center's website. And thank you all for being here. Let's have a round of applause for Jane Caputi.
Oh, thanks, everybody. Hi, Teresa.
Hey, Jane. This was so awesome.
This was really awesome. Hi, Yolanda. I'm going to look at the chat and see everybody who's here. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how full my heart is that all of you showed up. So thank you.
I was very fortunate to know some of the people